He could see and he could hear, but he would be unable to move or cry out. And he would know that this thing was outside the house. That's how the attack would start. He would sense it circling the house, almost like an animal wanting to come in. And then suddenly, he would be aware that it was in the house. So there's, again, a ratchet up of the fear. And he knows that this thing is going to get closer and closer and closer to him. And so suddenly it's in the house, and then suddenly it's in the hall, and then suddenly it's at the doorway of his bedroom, and then suddenly it's at the side of his bed.
Howdy, campers, and welcome back to your favorite podcast, That Would Be Rad, the podcast that majors in 80s and 90s nostalgia, comic culture, all things paranormal, and minors in retro video games, tabletop RPGs, pre-internet mysteries, and raising our kids to be half as cool as we were back in the 80s. I'm your counselor, Tyler Bentz, and this is your other camp counselor,
Woody Brown.
Hey, man, I just realized that I did this last time.
Oh, did you? Well, especially after I did it the one time so far this camp. And
yeah.
I think I always trick you. I think you found me out. I always trick you into doing it because I don't feel like it.
Yeah, you totally do. Because every time you're like, oh, yeah, it's you. Yeah.
You know what's funny? Another thing that I noticed is like you say, and Tyler Bentz or something like that. And then I always say, oh, Woody Brown. It's like we follow the same pattern and almost even like tune, really.
Well, we didn't used to because I started that first.
Here we go.
And then
I should have known.
You know, always trying to do what Tyler does.
Like not trying to do what you do, just kind of something similar, but just better. Perfecting what you do. There you go.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, speaking of perfecting and making it better, this week, what we have in store for you is, well, let's just put it this way. We've already talked about the Shadow Man encounters just as a generality. We then talked about, what did we talk about? Oh, yeah. We then talked about sleep paralysis. And then,
please leave that in.
Yeah. I mean, school starts in like a week. So it's just been nuts. I feel like the summer's ending and it's just crazy. But anyhow, and let's see, we talked about sleep paralysis. And then we talked about last week, we got a little bit more granular and we got more specific with it when we talked about the Hat Man. Well, one thing that we've discovered, and I think if you followed along this summer, that you've discovered potentially, listener, is that there are a lot of things that potentially can be categorized as one of these entities or events, I think. And we found a lot of similar things throughout the world that I think are super interesting and certainly worth mentioning this week in sort of like a broader sense. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, like we said in one of the episodes of this year's Camp Rad Strangeness, is that while everything may not, entirely be related to a shadow man or shadow person or whatever, I do think that the amount of overlap it's still kind of wild. I mean, they at least, they still share like a ton of the same, characteristics in like behavior, appearance, all that.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's like no way of, it's hard not to think that they are in at least some way related somehow.
Mm-hmm. So as you know, by judging from the title, that we are going to be covering several different genres, I guess you could say, or characters, genres that sort of exist within possibly exist within the Shadow Man, category,
Lore,
I guess. Yeah. And the first one is one of my favorites. I heard about this years ago, and I didn't know a ton about it, but I actually found this article that was kind of breaks it down and lays it out, and It's pretty amazing. So let's get into California's own Dark Watchers. As the sun begins its descent behind the waves, look to the sharp ridges of the Santa Lucia Range, the mountains that rise up from the shores of Monterey and down the central California coast. And if you're lucky, you might see figures silhouetted against them. Some say the Watchers are 10 feet tall, made taller or wider by hats or capes. They may turn to look at you, but they always move away quickly and disappear. For centuries, tales of the Dark Watchers have swirled in the misty Santa Lucia Mountains. Most stories begin with the local native tribes, which allegedly spoke of the shadowy figures in their oral traditions. When the Spanish arrived in the 1700s, they began calling the apparitions Los Vigilantes Oscuros. It's probably Vigilantes, right?
I mean, I'm not going to...
Do they have a G there?
It's a J.
Los
Vigilantes.
Los
Oscuros.
There it is. Literally means the Dark Watchers. And as Anglo-American settlers began staking claims in the region, they too felt the sensation of being watched from the hills. Accounts vary, although everyone agrees that the beings are more shadowy than human and more observant than aggressive. They took their most solid form in the first half of the 20th century, when two legendary writers memorialized them. In 1937, Robinson Jeffers, the poet of Life Along the Central Coast, drew inspiration from the Watchers for his collection entitled Such Counsels You Gave to Me in Other Poems. He thought it might be one of the Watchers, who are often seen in this length of coast range, forms that look human to human eyes, but certainly are not human. They come from behind ridges to watch, Jeffers wrote. He was not surprised when the figure turning toward him in the quiet twilight showed his face. Then it melted and merged into the shadows beyond it. And this is my favorite. The next year, John Steinbeck, famed, American novelist who wrote The Grapes of Wrath, as you may all know, who grew up in Salinas, spoke of them in his short story Flight. In the tale, a teenage Mexican-American boy kills a man and is forced to flee into the St. Lucias. As his mother bids him farewell, she urges him to say his prayers, take care of his horse, and when thou comest to the high mountains, if thou seest any of the dark watching men, go not near to them, nor try to speak to them. If you want to meet a dark watcher, you should bring a gift. Steinbeck's mother, Olive Hamilton, brought fruit or sometimes flowers. Steinbeck's son, Thomas, said his grandmother, a school teacher, was no fabulist, but she believed firmly in the Dark Watchers. She told her children and grandchildren that she left fruits or nuts in Mule Deer Canyon on her way to school in Big Sur. On the way back, there would always be flowers in their place. The story stuck with Steinbeck clearly and were echoed by Big Sur personalities like Doc Ricketts and Billy Post. The old-timers of Big Sur swear by it. Painter Benjamin Brode, who co-authored a book on the Watchers with Thomas Steinbeck, told the Monterey County Weekly in 2017, if you are a believer, the centuries of sightings are probably enough for you. But if you are a skeptic, you no doubt need to know what is actually causing these visual anomalies. There are a few theories. One that is that ordinary shadows cast by swaying trees and obscured by fog or mist are being twisted into humanoid shapes by our brains. We've talked about this before, but this phenomenon is known as pareidolia. It's how our pattern-seeking brains make sense of the world. Rorschach tests are reflections of pareidolia in action, so are images where people see faces in lunar landscapes, which we've talked about that quite a bit. It's sort of our brain's way of kind of like skinning certain things that we see in sort of humanoid forms.
It's like that meme that I talked about a couple weeks ago where that girl, like in the middle of the night, she sees somebody just like sitting in a room. She turns on the light and it's just like her laundry in a pile.
Right. Which that has happened to me.
Oh, yeah, me too.
A few
I
times.
thought Yoda was literally in my room when I was like 6 years old, and it freaked me out. But then also I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. Is this when I become a Jedi?
Yeah.
You know? And then I flicked the light on. It was just like, I don't know, a backpack or something.
I mean, that's just the thought of like, you know, it's kind of like, God, of course, I forget the name. The Last Starfighter. It's like, is Yoda here to recruit me?
Oh, that would be awesome.
So yeah, so I just thought that was really cool.
Well, I mean, out of the gate, dude, it's like we're like leveling up the fear factor. First, it's like just seeing one of these things in your room. Okay. Then it's like, well, maybe I'm just like having my brain's signal is kind of malfunctioning, and then that's why I can't move. And then it's like, well, now the guy's got a hat on. And then now this sucker's out in the woods. Now, what's interesting for our international listeners here, this mountain range is kind of located near, I mean, you heard Tyler mention Santa Cruz, California, but it's in Northern California, just south of like San Francisco area. A lot of really, really cool stuff in that area, including like the Hertz Castle. And what's interesting is, well, I say interesting, what's tragic is what I should say, is that my wife and I visited this area, boy, way back in like, might have been 2007, something like that.
Yeah.
And I had no idea about this stuff. I'm sure Tyler at the time had told me about it. I was like, oh, whatever, man. And I mean, I was in those woods. And I will say, you know, it's funny you mentioned, well, you know, maybe it's like a play of shadows and stuff. Out here on the East Coast, if you've never been out to that Northern California area, you haven't really experienced the huge, sort of almost fictional, in a way, size of these trees out there.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's like a magic land, you know?
You know, we've talked about actually going far on the East or the West Coast to one of the national parks, like redwoods and stuff.
Oh, man, it's incredible. We went through there, and it's just absolutely magical. 100% have to take your kids there because it's just like nothing they've ever seen.
Yeah, yeah. I did run across a forum where a poster talks about seeing these things, and I think it's really cool. It says, my husband and I were in California a few years ago for the wedding of my ex. Yeah, I know, strange, we actually got an invite. He and the new wife took us to Big Sur near the Santa Lucia Mountains. As we were out sightseeing, I looked at the mountains and asked them about the thin statues on the peaks. My ex and his wife looked rather scared and asked, oh my God, you saw them? I asked what the story was with the statues, and they said, no, they're not statues. They are the Dark Watchers. The local Native American tribes know more about them, but they've been here since the beginning of time. That creeped me out. I think that's so cool.
Man.
Yeah.
Now I'm like wanting to go through all my old pictures because I mean, I'm not joking, man. I was in that exact area. We went to Big Sur. We went to like all that stuff.
Yeah.
That's weird. And also Santa Cruz is another one of those locations that have a mystery spot.
Oh, man.
And I went to it then.
I love it.
And so it's like, is this some sort of, we talk about it on the show sometimes, a window area, you know, a place of high concentrated events of different entities kind of, you know, all in one spot. Have you heard anything about, I read something about Dark Watchers specifically where there is, that they are often surrounded by a rainbow halo?
Well, yes. So that's something I'm going to get into here in a little while.
Okay, cool.
But yeah, that's another sort of theory that they're tied into that, you know, which is kind of a natural anomaly. But yeah, I'll get into that here in a little while.
You know, it's interesting. This specifically, the Dark Watchers in general aren't. I mean, they're. It's another one of those phenomenon that is experienced by multiple cultures around the world, and so I think there's also thought that some of these cultures brought those stories and legends and lore from, you know, where they were coming from, whether it's, you know, Germanic or whether it's Viking. In any case, it ended up being a piece of those local Native American tribes on that coast.
Yeah, for sure. Well, probably my favorite aspect of the Dark Watchers are, you know, last week when we covered the Hat Man, again, he's sort of the star player of the shadow men, shadow people. And one of the questions that I sort of hypothesize is like, well, like, you know, there is that level of high strangeness just having like the hat involved we talked about the fedora and its inception, and well, how old would like the oldest sort of Hatman sighting go back to? And I've got to say, I do think that this is a really important topic for this series this year, this season of Camp Rad Strangeness, because I think these Dark Watchers may kind of hold the key to, well, what was the first Shadow Man encounter, and what, how far do these things go back? And I just find that absolutely fascinating. That like we're talking, the fedoras, I think they were talking about 1800s, but it's clear here that when the Spanish came into the area, which would have been the 1700s, the native tribes were already talking about these things for a long time. Like it goes way back. And they talk about them wearing these sort of like capes and these hats, and like even sometimes like holding like canes and stuff.
Man.
It's really interesting.
Well, what else is interesting about this, and I'm going to take it down to Southern California. So, and we talk about this too, man. One of our favorite things, just in general, and it's something that we don't really know enough about, and I've said it time and time again, I wish so bad, honestly, that I would have perhaps even majored in just Native American studies, because there is so much fascinating lore, stories, traditions, art. It's just such a rich culture that we kind of have an opportunity to learn more about as Americans, and we're fascinated by all those indigenous sort of traditions around the world too, because there's just like something so like unique and like pure about a lot of those stories and legends,
Yeah.
Anyway, this one is just super interesting. So in 1968, there were a lot of reports of Native American spirits appearing in homes in the greater metropolitan area of Los Angeles.
Oh, yeah.
This was reported by the LA Herald Examiner, which I'm pretty sure they wrote a review of our album one time. I don't really know if I liked it. But anyhow, this reporter was a lady named Wanda Sue Parrott.
That sounds fake.
And what's cool about it is she actually wrote an article about this phenomenon. So after describing a number of first-person accounts in this article, she wrote that many area residents, men, women, children, had shared in this ghostly Native American experience in their homes. These shadowy figures, yet identifiable as being dressed in traditional tribal clothing, had been sighted in bedrooms and living rooms at all hours of the day and night. Now, real quick, it's already pretty different than anything that we've talked about so far, because typically there's a time of day that this happens. With the Dark Watchers, it's either at dusk or at night.
Right.
With the Hat Man and the Shadow Man, it's at night in your bedroom.
Yep.
And they're either wearing capes or these hats. In this case, they're describing them as wearing these Native American clothing, or this Native American clothing. When one person found herself so unnerved by the manifestation of a Native American ghost in her home that she consulted a psychiatrist, she was told that there was nothing wrong with her. Many of the doctor's patients had had similar experiences. Nearly all of the witnesses agreed that while their sudden appearances had been startling, the spirits seemed friendly and that they stayed for only a few moments before fading away. In a number of cases, Mrs. Parrott found that these folks felt that the shadow figures of Native American spirits had come to protect them and warn them of approaching danger.
That's how they get you.
There are, of course, reports of shadow people manifesting all over the world, like we've said. In the article written, this is super interesting. It says, perhaps one reason why so many individuals in the United States are encountering shadow people lies in the oft-stated observation that the portals between the worlds of the spiritual and the material are becoming thinner. And this is also interesting. There's a chief named Chief Seattle. And he gave this warning right after essentially their lands had been sort of taken by, quote, treaty in 1855. And now it's almost like this, it's a prophetic warning. He said that basically he's warning who he considered to be his white conquerors that they would always have to deal with the red man, if not in flesh, then as phantoms. Listen to this. Every part of this country is sacred to my people. Every hillside, every valley, every plain and grove has been hallowed by some fond memory of some sad experience of my people. When the last red man shall have perished from the earth, and his memory among the white men shall have become a myth, these shores shall swarm with the invisible dead of my tribe. At night, when the streets of your cities and villages shall be silent, and you think them deserted, they will throng with the returning hosts that once filled and still love this beautiful land. The white man shall never be alone, for the dead are not altogether powerless. Dead, did I say? There is no death, only a change of worlds. I mean...
Man, that's awesome.
That's awesome. It's also terrifying.
Yeah.
And maybe we might, come back to this when we start talking about what we think is going on here, because...
Yeah. I also ran across this other story that is actually pretty similar to yours, but apparently in this area called San Martin, which is in that same kind of area, there's a place called Skeleton Cave. So basically in the 60s, these gold prospectors found the entrance to a cave that had been, sort of shut down, and it was completely filled with skeletons. The Monterey County Sheriff came out for it, and the final count was 100 skeletons, all of which but one appeared to be Native American. The odd one appeared to be of European descent. A steer's leg bone was found in the mix of skeletons, and they all apparently were killed by blunt force trauma to the head. Forensic experts dated all the bones to be about 100 years before to the 1860s. Local natives came and said a few words, and as far as I know, the cave was sealed and the location still isn't clear. Just before we go on, one thing that was interesting in my research on this was, this poster in some, random forum or whatever was like, she lives in Mexico, and she was like, well, to me, this is no surprise because here in Mexico, Brujas live and wander like the tops of mountains. And so, all these people talking about seeing the Hat Man, like what do witches wear? They wear pointed hats. And so to her, like Brujas are, when we think of witches, it's a little different culturally over there. It's kind of like, some of the witches in like indigenous lore and stuff were like hairy men. And so it's just sort of like an evil kind of entity. It's not like witch as like what we think of always is like, oh, it's like the wicked witch of the east or west or, whatever. But I did think that was interesting, the idea, that parallel between, oh, well, it's just a witch. You're just sort of mistaking a pointy hat to like a fedora. I thought that was interesting.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of like if they only had, because of all these like differences and stuff, it kind of reminds me of this too in the, in sort of like just this lore of the Dark Watchers. You're like seeing this entity from afar. And then the second that you start to kind of like get some focus, it sort of dissipates and disappears. If only you had a little bit more sort of, clarity.
Yeah. One thing that I do sort of regret, and I just found this out like a couple days ago, so, didn't have the time, but John Steinbeck, his son, Thomas Steinbeck, along with the help, I think I mentioned it before, but along with the help of a lot of the locals, he has like a whole book on just the Dark Watchers phenomenon.
What?
Yeah.
Man, that's
incredible.
incredible.
Which is pretty, it's amazing. And maybe we'll have like a recap or something once we can grab that.
Once I read the book and you don't? Yeah.
Yeah, once I give it to Woody to read.
I didn't even know John Steinbeck's son wrote anything. So I think, we should have some sort of like follow-up, whether that's, towards the end of this season, a time that we can kind of become a little bit more clear about these entities. And I think maybe by that time, You know, because it's always evolving. Our knowledge about all these topics and stuff constantly evolving, giving us a little bit more, I don't know, a clearer picture of what these things could be. And speaking of clarity and a clear picture of things, sometimes I gotta have focus, man. You know, and it's hard to do when look at these entities. Just as an example, you're looking at them; they disappear the second you get them.
Very foggy.
It kind of seems like a fleeting thought.
Yeah,
you know. Well, one thing that's helped me in real life,
and one thing that they could really use,
they could use these people that are trying to find these things is, boy, don't you wish they had magic mind like we do?
Amen.
I mean, before we were given the opportunity to even try magic mind, I did truly feel like, I mean, aren't we all just constantly battling distractions? I mean, with these smartphones, social media, stress of just regular life. It's almost like these dark watchers are looming over my productivity. But you know what, man?
Oh, masterful.
We have our own secret weapon against the chaos.
That's true.
Every single morning, I personally take my Magic Mind shot and I'm ready to tackle whatever the day is going to throw at me, man. I mean,
and by morning, Woody means 3 a.m.
5 a.m., I'm ready to tackle the day. Clear mind, focused energy. And it's not, for me, it's not just, it's not a caffeine fix.
Yeah.
It's sustainable energy using the amazingly organic, sourced ingredients that they use. And I've noticed the difference, man, honestly, about how smooth my days are going, even just when trying to organize an episode of this podcast, how much better I'm able to do that.
Totally agree.
You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah, 100% agree.
Here's the best part, listener. You can try it too. Right now, there's a special offer that we've got going during Camp Rad Strangeness for up to 48% off of your first subscription or 20% off a one-time purchase with the code That Would Be Rad and then the number 20 at checkout. All you got to do is head to magicmind.com/thatwouldberad and type in the code That Would Be Rad, then the number 20. You know, we love it so much. It's part of the reason why we decided to accept them as our title sponsor for this year's Camp Rad Strangeness. Trust me, once you try Magic Mind, you'll see how it can transform your day. Now, let's get back to unraveling the mysteries of the Dark Watchers, these Night Marchers, and everything else that's out there.
So before we move on to your next topic, I do want to draw one thing that I thought of. I don't know, it's interesting just in the title, if we're looking at these things as being ancient and, being around much, much, much earlier than those early indigenous tribes, even just the name Night Watchers, it's hard for me not to go back to, something that I'm fascinated with. Well, we're both fascinated with, and that we've actually talked quite a bit about this season, and that is the Nephilim. And, there's certain things, in the Book of Enoch and even some of the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Bible, where they're called like the Shining Ones, where their eyes glow. That's another thing here with the Dark Watchers. But the thing that really, I don't know, kind of made me think that there could be a parallel is that idea that sometimes they're like 10 to 15 to even sometimes 20 feet tall in appearance, which is kind of crazy. I mean, I know that sounds bonkers, but I don't know. It is just interesting the fact that it's often called like the Watchers, were these fallen angels that would come and, they would
dude, that's what I was about to say. Okay, if it wasn't because correct me if I'm wrong here, but with the Nephilim, and I'm just going to say it that way.
No, that's fine. That's
okay. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but they do have like a physical body, right? Of sorts. Isn't it some, or is that just like am I getting that confused with like the partial animal human being type?
Well, you're right and wrong.
Okay. So just real quick, hold it.
Okay.
For just one second. I'm right and wrong. Good deal. For me though, when you were describing that and kind of getting into this sort of angle of it all, it did immediately, and you mentioned it at the end there, but immediately it brought to mind sort of like a fallen angel scenario because they weren't given the opportunity to have like a physical body, which is something that they've been jealous of humanity for. And so then it's like, well, okay, these are sort of these beings that are somewhat trapped here with us, so
Right.
to speak.
Yep.
Or at least have access to our realm. And yeah, they would be like these big, large, creepy things that are just like watching us. And for the most part, in most of these stories, although we'll kind of talk about it differently in a second, up until now, I'll say all the episodes prior to like here in just a few minutes, they haven't been able to really sort of physically interact other than, you know, the pressure of the chest, the sleep paralysis stuff, which is more maybe just like a power. It's not really them actually sitting on your chest. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. It's like a byproduct of them just being there.
Right. And perhaps it's like we talked about last week, some sort of innate, natural
Right. I guess
instinct
power.
response to that presence being in the room with you. And so immediately it's like, wow, I never thought about that, man. I'm so glad you brought that up because that is a very interesting idea that these entities could be that, you know?
Yeah. I mean, that, and, you know, this is what I meant by like, you're not right or you're not wrong. You know, these quote unquote watchers, the beginning of time were basically, you know, sort of the fallen angels. They came down. They were basically sent to spend their time on earth until God would come back and all that. And so they, you know, which they were not supposed to do, but they were these sort of spiritual things, but they did have elements of like physicality. So it said they laid with the sons of God, laid with the daughters of men, and they had babies, and these babies were known as the Nephilim. And, you know, there's some sort of discrepancies in that where just because of our differences in like measurements, you know, from that time and until now, there's a lot of like, well, I think it was this, or I think it was this, because their sort of modes of measurement were, you know, totally different back then. But it is interesting because they do talk about some of these things were 20 feet tall. Some of these things were even 100 feet tall, which is crazy. And they talk about the women or the mothers, you know, dying in the process. So basically you had these absolute giants, and then you know, as they would sort of continue on, like the giants would get smaller and smaller just throughout time. And then, you know, that's why basically you have Noah's Ark. God flooded the earth to get rid of this sort of bloodline of like, you know, faults or fallen angel bloodline, the corrupted bloodline, if you will. And so that's what we think of as, you know, when we say the term, you know, this is what Michael Heiser thinks and several other sort of experts in this field, but they believe that's whenever you hear the term like, oh, they're just demons, and they think, oh, well, that's just like the fallen angels. It's a little bit more complex. The demons that we're supposedly seeing are the offspring that were killed in the flood, and so the rest of their time here is spent like disembodied. And so to have bodies, you know, and we've talked about this, they like possession you hear about, or like even oppression. We've talked about possibly even like now being able to communicate like through like AI technology, like through the internet, like Ouija boards and stuff. This is them trying to sort of get a wedge into like the physical reality that we live in.
And I think that's such a interesting thing to think about as well, is like as our technology as humans has evolved. You know, you talked about like the different measurement systems. I mean, it's kind of humorous to me to imagine like the guy that's like, I just came up with it. I got it. All right. This is 14 pinkies tall. And they're like, what about a foot? And he's like, dang it.
Yeah.
You know, our like everything's evolved, and to think that if there are these entities, to think that they wouldn't sort of evolve in some way as well is just kind of foolish, I think. Also, if you're just joining us today for the first time and you don't know what in the world we're talking about in terms of Nephilim, and that good but yet brief description of it just didn't do it for you, refer to our previous episode.
Hear more about this on That Would Be Rad, Season 3, Episode 25, Giants Among Us, The Legend of the Kandahar Giant. And also on Season 3, Episode 27, The Fomorians, the lost children of the Nephilim.
Mm-hmm.
Because we really get into the meat and potatoes of stuff that, even as like a kid that went to church every Sunday growing up,
Oh, yeah.
never heard about this kind of stuff. The fact that that's
No.
the reason, or at least a potential reason for the flood and everything, just
Yeah.
I remember when we were doing that episode, it was kind of like I had like almost like this epiphany of understanding at that point that I've never had before, because it's like, oh man,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is interesting.
Real quick, sorry, because one of the arguments against Old Testament God versus New Testament God is the differences in Old Testament God is like this, really intense, like, I'm going to flood the whole world. You're not doing what I'm telling you to do. And then New Testament God is all, it's like love and like all this kind of stuff. Like, it really sort of, I don't know. It makes more sense is the short version. And it makes it less like, oh, this is just like a hateful punishment.
Right.
I don't know. It's very, very interesting.
Well, and one of the things too is like that, even down to the story of like David and Goliath. That was you had Noah's Ark, you had David and Goliath. Like as a kid, those were two of like your bigger ones. And I know that like this is a Shadow Man episode, so we're getting back to
we're
the
gonna
doc.
get back to it.
Yeah. But, the fact that like we were never even told about there was a king named King Og who was he was from this tribe called the Raphaites, and they were like all giants. And it's interesting that like and that's what, that's who Goliath like belonged to. And so they were called to basically take out this tribe. And again, because even in the Bible, it talks about, there were Nephilim then and after, which means there was still this like lineage beyond the flood, like post-Diluvian.
One of them snuck on that ark and they're like, here we go. Let me just.
I mean, it is interesting. I'm not sure how all that worked out, but yeah, they did sort of survive. And you can still find this in the city of Rabbah. You can still see his bed, which was 13 feet long and 6 feet wide.
Wow.
And so this is like, we're talking like biblical days. Like, why does a king need a bed? And also being known to be like,
what do you mean? Why does a king need a bed to sleep in?
No. I'm saying why would a king like back then and like with the resources? Yes, he's a king, but it's like this is where.
Why would it need to be that big? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's massive.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Because they were known as like giants, and I'm sure the Smithsonian's been involved there.
Here we go. Let's get back into the shadows.
But real quick. But there have been fossils and stuff around there, or like remains where these bones are just like massive. So anyway, getting back into the Shadow Man stuff.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
Hey, it's Kaylee Cuoco for Priceline. Ready to go to your happy place for a happy price? Well, why didn't you say so? Just download the Priceline app right now and save up to 60% on hotels. So whether it's Cousin Kevin's Kazoo Concert in Kansas City, go Kevin, or Becky's Bachelorette Bash in Bermuda, you never have to miss a trip ever again. So download the Priceline app today. Your savings are waiting.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
It's a pretty cool place if you're a Martian.
Or a vampire. You think you really know what's happening around here, don't you? We're fighters for truth, justice, and the American way.
Hey, this is Woody.
And this is Tyler. And you're listening to That Would Be Rad.
And now, back to our show.
I think it's interesting that they are talking about these shadows with the Dark Watchers that are like, some are like 10 feet tall. So like, does that mean that they were like, they're still sort of these disembodied spirits and, and their spirits just sort of still assume this, like how big they were back when they were alive?
Man.
It's interesting.
In contrast, let me throw this at you. So there are these accounts where people globally just refer to it as the dark, okay? Which somehow makes it even scarier to me. I don't know why, but it's like, even as a kid, when you think of generalized term like the dark, like, are you afraid of the dark? Thank you very much, 1990s.
Yeah.
There's so much that, there's this potential of unknown that like lives within it. You know what I mean? So the fact that they're describing these things as the dark, just terrifying, right?
Yeah.
Well,
Which, by the way, small note, I finally just started The Dark on Netflix.
Oh, yes.
The one that everybody's like, oh, you got to
so
watch
good,
it.
dude.
Yeah.
All right, so there's tons of different accounts. We've talked about the different characteristics that a lot of these have in common, which is like no discernible mouths, noses, or facial expressions. That kind of changed a little bit when we talked about the Hat Man. There was an encounter where, someone saw them smiling, or at least felt like they were smiling.
Yeah, that's creepy.
But here's where it's kind of different than us talking about them in terms of them potentially being of giant origin, because there are also many accounts that exist of these entities being child-sized humanoids, or these shapeless masses that sometimes change to more human-like forms, or even sometimes animals.
Wow.
Eyes sometimes are not mentioned as being discernible, but in some reports, like you were saying, they will glow red, white, or sometimes even blue.
Yeah. And again, that is a thing that is common with these like fallen angels. It's said that like their eyes would glow, or even their bodies would glow at times. So I do think it's interesting.
Sometimes people have referred to him as, of course, the Dark Man or the Dark One or Hat Man, but also the Darkling or the Darkling King.
What is that?
So, okay, let me just kind of take you down a path here. Sometimes also in Middle English, they were called the Wight, W-I-G-H-T. It's an old Middle English word, W-I-H-T, wit, I guess, used to describe a creature or a living being, and it's akin to Old High German, which means a creature or thing. The evil of the Darklings over the centuries is sort of based on the supernatural, shadow-like creature of both modern folklore and traditional Native American beliefs. This is, again, that point where a lot of these lores intersect. These creatures are known to attempt to pull you from your room, your bed, at night, perhaps even to strangle or assault you.
Yikes.
The Darklings can also bite you, hit you, hurt you, and have even been known to poke your eyes out as you sleep. They've been known to kill infants as they slept in their mother's arms. They can scratch you to the bone. There's even tales of them stealing kidneys, thought to be what they love to eat from sleeping victims. According to folklore, they may appear at first as dark forms in the peripheries of people's vision as they begin to haunt them. If they find no reason to haunt you, then they seem to disintegrate or dissolve between walls. All in all, like these kind of reports, again, the Darkling King, I wasn't able to really find anything specific about that except very sort of adjacent to all of this, which is there are like stories and sort of scary stories told about the Darkling King basically being in charge of and having these minions that he sends out. So now we're talking about something different in the sense that so many people have experienced sort of like these entities coming to visit them. The idea that there is someone in charge of that in a way that there's like an organization of sorts takes it to another level too, man. Right? So like they're all sort of reporting to somebody, or they're different, and that's why maybe there can be differences in not only appearance, but then the behaviors that they exhibit and the things that they do can be different.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? And they're all sort of reporting to this like Darkling King who, for whatever reason, maybe he's trying to collect, whatever, souls, freaking, whatever the reasoning behind it. I just found that to be so interesting because I never really thought about it in that way. We kind of always sort of, at least me personally, I've always sort of thought of it as like, this is a single entity that we all just happen to be experiencing.
Yeah, how is it kind of like how like, some people believe that like Bigfoot is like just one Bigfoot, that they're kind of seeing everywhere. One of the things that to me that that sort of reminded me of, this sort of goes back to like a biblical thing, but it does talk about how these demons or fallen angels or whatever, these principalities, like there was this idea that these, so basically Satan, the devil, whatever, he rules over earth, technically. That's why we have like temptation and, we're sort of born in sin and this whole idea. And so it is interesting though, because it talks about how like there's different areas in the world that are governed by sort of different demons, basically. And so that's interesting, that idea of like the dark king or the night king or whatever. Like maybe that's just like his particular area, and then these minions or these like sort of like lesser than darklings, I guess, are kind of there to like do the bidding, which is kind of fascinating.
Yeah, and also terrifying.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, while we're here, you were talking about that being sort of rooted in like High German. I was going to wait until later, but I think this is a topic that we should kind of cover now. So one of the things, especially with the Dark Watchers, that a lot of your debunkers go to is this. It's sort of a like, it's sort of an optical illusion. It's sort of a type of like fog and like light distillation type phenomenon. But that can be related to this thing called the Brocken specter. It's German, and I'm not going to even, might as well. Brockengespenst, also called Brockenbau, mountain specter or specter of the Brocken, is basically this magnified and apparently enormous shadow of an observer cast in the midair upon any type of cloud opposite of a strong light source. The figure's head can be surrounded by a bright area called a Heiligenschein, or halo-like rings of rainbow-colored light forming a glory, and that's what you were talking about, which appear opposite the sun's direction when uniformly sized water droplets in clouds refract and backscatter sunlight. The phenomenon can appear on any misty mountainside, cloud bank, or can be seen from an aircraft. But the frequent fogs and low altitude accessibility of the Brocken, which is the highest peak of the Harz Mountains in Germany, have created a local legend from which the phenomenon draws its name. The Brocken specter was observed and described by Johann Silberschlag in 1780 and has often been recorded in literature about the region. Yeah, it's really cool. One of the other things that I thought you would absolutely love.
Alexa Chung.
Dude, no, but Carl Jung, which rhymes, where he says, I had a dream which both frightened and encouraged me. And, I'm saying this because we've talked about Carl Jung almost in every episode of this series. It was night in some unknown place, and I was making slow and painful headway against a mighty wind. Dense fog was flying along everywhere. I had my hands cupped around a tiny light which threatened to go out at any moment. Suddenly, I had the feeling that something was coming up behind me. I looked back and saw a gigantic black figure following me. When I awoke, I realized at once that the figure was a specter of the Brocken, my own shadow on the swirling mists brought into being by the little light I was carrying. Now, if that isn't cool enough, there is something else that's even cooler, where this was also featured in the manga One Piece. Brocken specters make an appearance in the Skypiea story arc.
Yeah, the Skypiea.
Or Skypiea.
Man.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah. God. Now, I wish you would have told me that before so that I don't want to take the time to go over to the shelves, but yeah, I'll include pictures of what they're talking about.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting phenomenon, and I do, I'm not really one for debunking typically, but I do like the idea that would sort of explain the shadow, the sort of enormity of the shadows of these Dark Watchers. However, I don't know, to me it doesn't quite add up. I think it's interesting, but they're not always also like sort of related to like fog and that kind of stuff.
Well, one more that's kind of related to water that I kind of briefly mentioned previously was, and there's a bunch of different Native American legends that revolve around this three sisters kind of motif. What's the word I'm looking for here?
Yeah,
Not
yeah.
motif, but trope. Yeah, this
Trope,
three
yeah.
sisters trope. And a lot of them, it has to do with like agriculture and stuff. But I found this one where, I mean, they really are not just a harbinger of death, but like almost like this nightly warning. And so there's this area, I think it's let me see what tribe this is. Potomac. And the legend goes that there are these three maidens, all of them daughters of a chief. And they met together one dark night and basically snuck out in these canoes and were just like rowing downriver. Well, the medicine man of the tribe followed them along shore, sort of just creeping under brush and woods. And they were slowly paddling up current. And they had these like shells and feathers and their hair streamed long in the wind, it says. And for whatever reason, they kept to the center of this stream. And just as they were about to veer and cross over, the medicine man called in a hollow voice that their hour of death had come. And when that happened, dude, there were these lights that sort of like swirled around them, and then they were caught in this whirlpool, which swirled around their canoes, and they were so scared that they flung themselves into the water. Now, in their place, there are these three stones in this river. Okay, now, on the surface of this, it kind of sounds like a little story that an old man told it to a bunch of kids that lived on. But here's what's interesting, man. There's this old ballad from this story. Listen to this, dude. It says, "Swiftly they came and swifter, with dark eyes glancing around, with soft words glad and eager for the braves of the Powhatan. When out of the darkness around them, out from the black of the trees, the voice of the Great Spirit called them, like the cry of choking seas. They leaped with a moan of terror into the heart of the mere. The waters hissed around them. The stars were white with fear. Three rocks, spired and gloomy, gray as a stormy sky, sprang from the depth of the whirlpool where the Indian sisters lie. Ever at night they ring, like a sad cathedral bell. Echoing far on the waters, they sound the warning knell." Isn't that crazy?
Dude, that is amazing.
Yeah.
It also kind of reminds me of, and of course I can't think of it, maybe like the Thunderbird episode, but wasn't there like some native sort of tale where, you know, it's kind of like the like river Styx or like traveling to the underworld? Wasn't it like through like a whirlpool in a stream kind of thing?
Man, it rings a bell, but I couldn't tell you.
Yeah, I can't either. Well, we're about to take a break, but before that, I want to end our sort of breakdown of Dark Watchers with another mention out of John Steinbeck's Flight on the Dark Watchers. It says, Pepe looked suspiciously back every minute or so, and his eyes sought the tops of ridges ahead. Once, on a white barren spur, he saw a black figure for a moment, but he looked quickly away, for it was one of the Dark Watchers. No one knew who the Watchers were, nor where they lived, but it was better to ignore them and never to show interest in them. They did not bother one who stayed on the trail and minded his own business.
We will return after these messages.
There's something out there waiting for us. And it ain't no dead.
Hey, this is Bryce Johnson from the Bigfoot Collectors Club, and you're listening to Tyler and Woody on That Would Be Rad, because that is rad.
Before we move away from sort of these, I'd say relatively similar, sort of almost like ghost-like or haunting type experiences, I read something in one of my Enchanted World books. Specifically, it's about ghosts, but I just thought there's 2 short passages that I thought were just too good not to share. The first one is really cool because it has like this, well, it says this: some tales of haunted rooms are long, but many are short. And the shortest tale of all concerns a man startled from a deep sleep. He lay in a pitch dark, silent room and longed for the comfort of a lighted candle. The story runs in its entirety as follows. He woke up frightened and reached for a match, and a match was put into his hand. Isn't that scary, dude?
Yeah, dude.
I mean, it's literally like it's a 1-sentence scary story.
I mean, sometimes those are the best. Those short little. I remember, the ghost story books and like those, especially from the 80s and stuff, and 90s. But some of those like little short, like tiny little, like poem or sonnet or whatever.
It says the word poem so weird. Go ahead.
I feel like I said sonnet weird too. Sonnet. Sonate. Yeah, all weird. Are we ready to get into the next thing?
No. I was going to say, the best part about those being short back then for any of those scary story books was that my mom would never let me get those books at the book fair. So I was just hoping for a quick one that I could read while I'm like, I'm still looking for and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so scary. Okay.
Oh, I got them all. I was obsessed.
Yeah. No, this one is kind of talking about, just because I want to kind of take it one more place internationally, and then we'll get back to what you wanted to talk about. So there's this castle in Cumberland called Gilsland Castle. Okay. It's always been known for these like incredible stone walls, but like there's this sort of humidity there. Walls kind of shine with this like dampness. And throughout these corridors, there are these just like icy drafts. And it kind of reminds me, it puts into mind, Ireland, where you're kind of walking through these castles and stuff, these old ancient structures, and you're getting these like sort of like cold coastal breeze. Again, it kind of reminds me of San Francisco for that matter.
God, you just bragged. That was like 2 humble brags.
No. I'm just saying that's what it reminds me of.
Never been.
So it talks about how once there's this small boy who was basically staying in this empty upstairs room, and he was actually kind of being punished. And so he had to be in that room because he was like, mischievous. He ended up freezing to death there. And for centuries afterward, this little night-gowned figure could be seen wandering the house upstairs, downstairs, and all throughout, and would be seen sort of like in the doorway of almost every chamber, reportedly. This is so scary, dude. Teeth chattering, body trembling, he walked the dark, searching for an open door. If he entered a room where someone was sleeping, he sort of just whimpered by the bed. If the person was ill, he would lay his freezing cold hand upon the person and whisper, "Cold, cold, forever cold. You shall be cold forevermore." And the sick person always died after that visitation. Isn't that scary?
Yeah, that's really creepy.
And there's this insane painting inside this book where it just shows this like strange child figure in the shadows, just like reaching out. And so it kind of just it reminds me of the fact that like in some of these legends, not many, but in the direction that we're kind of talking about, that sometimes they can be described as like shadowy, child-sized figures. Now, going this far, I don't know if we could consider it sort of just like reaching, but we're starting to get into that realm of like hauntings and like, ghosts and stuff. But there are so many similarities between these that, I mean, that's part of the reason why I wanted to kind of move in this direction for this episode specifically.
Yeah, I think one of the things that it reminded me of is, and I've talked to you about this, but I have a really close friend that I've known forever, and him and I, were it was the first sort of big exposure into like UFOs and Roswell and all this stuff. And, you know, we were just into this stuff like crazy as young boys. And so with him especially, I think he's always looked at a lot of, you know, anything is like sort of paranormal. He's always kind of looked at it through the lens of like aliens or, you know, something like that. Like where most people would veer into like, oh, it's a ghost. He would veer into, oh, it's like an abduction type thing. And it is really weird because and I haven't talked to him in a while, which reminds me I need to call him because he's a good friend, my oldest friend probably. But he used to talk about having these, they were almost like visitations, like pretty consistently, where he would be asleep in his bed, and then especially when he lived back at his folks' house, and he would wake up and, you know, kind of a similar thing as mine, he would see, but instead of seeing like a shadow person at the foot of the bed, he would always see these like little, they're almost like, he always explained them as like almost like cloaked like figures, but they were really small, like, you know, sort of like dwarf size or sort of hobbit size if you're thinking of it. And yeah, he would wake up and then I can't remember the details. I would love to get him on, but they would either be sort of just staring at him, or like when I guess they were sort of more aware that he was aware of them, they would sort of scurry off like out of his room into the living room, and then, as you can guess, would, you know, disappear or no longer be there when he got up. So I do find that interesting, that concept of like darklings being these like little sort of minions or something. I also would like to say that the reason I also like the Dark Watcher stuff and some of the other sort of characters that we've talked about thus far on the show is, again, a lot of them share that same sort of like observing effect kind of thing, where you don't really know like what their purpose is, but they're just sort of like watching. And yeah, it's weird. It's really bizarre. Yeah. Like what are they doing? Like, and are they somehow like gaining something that we're just unable to see?
Right. Or perhaps they don't have the ability to communicate, and because of that, instantly we're terrified, you know? Because it's like you can't determine its
like intentions.
Intentions, yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, because of the time of day and or the environment that you're experiencing this, you know, it doesn't really leave a lot of room for like, oh, everything's all right. No, there's like a figure that's somewhat human-sized looking at me. And it doesn't seem like what kind of, like, is it good? It's hard for me. It's hard, I think, in the moment to sort of lean in that direction.
I mean, we fear what we don't know. One of the things about that's kind of even more scary is, you know, it talks about, you know, your chances are better to see them at dusk and dawn. And so the idea that like, oh, well, you're kind of able to see them like when the sun's like barely kind of coming up.
Wait a minute. You see there, folks, this is Tyler's way of getting on his soapbox about me not waking up so early.
No, it's not.
Just trying to come. This is you battling me saying, hey, man, go to bed early when we talked about sleep paralysis.
Well, I mean, a little bit. I also I kind of would like you to see one of these as you're doing your morning run.
I've been spooked before on a morning run when the only thing lighting my way many years ago, before they had, you know, extremely cheap, powerful LED headlamps. This was just like a crummy little headlamp that I used for camping that basically was just like a flood of very dispersed, like, or I should say diffused light. Yeah. And I was running down this road, so dark outside. And
3 a.m.
It was like 4:30 actually, honestly, because at that time I was training for Ironman. I had to get up really early to be done in time to drive to work.
Stark.
Anyway, I'm like running, and I just run up on this family of deer, and they were just laying down. I guess they were just kind of like, I don't think that's anything to be worried about, until I just got right up on them. And then they decided, well, now's the time to just jump. and run away. Dude, I literally jumped up in the air, like I'm running. Just imagine me just being like, boing, and I just like jump up in the air, straight up in the air.
Oh, yeah.
So scared.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Dude,
don't wish that
deer-
upon me, okay?
They're very like erratic.
Yeah.
You know, they're like prey animals. So they're just so like jumpy and yeah, it's pretty intriguing. No. That whole point, the reason I was saying that is, and to me, this sort of adds an even another level of sort of being scary to this, is the idea that like, oh, well, we're able to see these things more because like, you know, it's sort of at dusk and at dawn and, you know, it's just dark enough. So it's not quite nighttime, not quite daytime. But to me, I think that says a lot more because that means what if, or it doesn't mean, but what if these things are there all through the night and you're just not able to see them?
Shoot.
So like these little like slivers of like windows of time and dawn and dusk, you know, that's just when we're able to see them.
Yeah.
But maybe they're staring at us at all times.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of makes sense, honestly. And maybe the times that you're talking about is when it's kind of like the thinning of the veil, you know, that witching hour at 3 a.m. or whatever.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, they have the ability to, you know, kind of explore, or at least we can then see them. Yikes.
Yeah, it's pretty creepy. Next up is another one of my favorites, although I have a theory on this that is a little bit different from the Dark Watchers, and that is the Night Marchers. The Night Marchers are the deadly ghost of ancient tribal Hawaiian warriors. The Night Marchers are the vanguard for a sacred king, chief, or chiefess. I mean, that sounds interesting, doesn't it? Sort of like the Night King or the Dark King. On the nights honoring the Hawaiian gods Kane, Ku, Lono, or on the nights of Kanaloa, they are said to come forth from their burial sites or to rise up from the ocean and to march in a large group to ancient Hawaiian battle sites or other sacred places. The legend says the Night Marchers are normal-sized warriors dressed for battle, carrying spears, clubs, and some are beating war drums and blowing tones from conch shells to announce the advancing of their march. According to the myth, they are suspended in air. Their feet do not touch water or ground as they traverse through the night, and they leave no evidence of their visitations. They march in darkness after sunset and march as a group continuously until just before sunrise. Also familiar. Anyone living along their path may hear chanting, sounds of blown conch shell tones, and marching noises in the night. The following signs are a foul and musky, death-like odor, and torches getting brighter and brighter as the Night Marchers get closer. The Night Marchers might appear during the day if they are to escort a dying relative to the spirit world. Ancient Hawaiian beliefs state that any mortal looking upon or being seen in defiance toward the Night Marchers will die violently. Barriers placed in the path of Night Marchers will not deter them. Some people maintain that if the mortal lies motionless, face down on the ground, they are showing proper respect, fear, and deference to the Night Marchers, and they will be spared. Additionally, mortals can avoid harm or death from Night Marchers by being fortunate to have an ancient ancestor marcher present to recognize them, which that's pretty interesting. As they encounter the mortal, they will call out Nau, which means mine in Hawaiian. No one in the warrior procession will harm them. Legend says planting living tai or cordyline shrubs around one's home is said to keep away all evil spirits and will cause the Huakai Po to avoid the area. The Night Marchers are said to walk through houses with doors and back doors placed in a straight line. The ceremony and conduct of the march are customized to the taste of its honored warrior leader. A Hawaiian king or chief is known to be fond of music, would be honored with much drumming and chanting. If the king or chief enjoyed peace and quiet, the march would be as silent as possible. Further, If the king or chief did not like to walk around much, he would be carried in a sling by warriors.
Tyler.
That would be me, yeah. In Hawaiian lore, the laws declared body parts of a king or chief to be sacred and not to be seen by a mortal. The punishment for looking at these parts is always instant death, usually by bolts of intense light and flaming heat originating from several of the warrior's eyes, aimed toward the mortal. Again, that sounds similar.
Yeah. Wait, hold on real quick. Let me break in real quick. So I just want to make sure I understood that correctly. So if you look at these night marchers, you're going to get blazed with holy fire, basically.
Yep, exactly.
Sounds like an angel.
It kind of does, doesn't it? It shoots out of its eyes. The violating mortal is incinerated instantly, and the bodily remains dissipate as vapors. If a king's or chief's face was not supposed to be observed, the king or chief would lead the assembled night marchers from the front. If his back was not to be looked upon, he would be in back of the assembled group. However, for some chiefs, no part of them was forbidden to look at by mortals. These chiefs would march among their warriors in the group. Some marchers are joined by the Hawaiian gods. The torches are said to burn brighter in these marches. The largest torches are carried with one at the front, one in the back, and 3 within the group. The number 5 is significant in Hawaiian mythology. In the night marchers with Hawaiian gods present, there are 6 gods, 3 male, 3 female. The goddess named Haiaiaka I Kapoli o Pele, commonly shortened to Hayaka, is often within the night marchers. The composition of night marchers is extremely varied. So,
I mean, first off, you sounded exactly like Greedo from Star Wars when you were pronouncing that name, and
horrible. Totally butchered it, I'm sure.
Very interesting, man, because number one, there's a lot of rules there, and so I would just be so scared. I'm just not going outside, because I don't want to get blasted by the holy light or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have the chance that if you do stumble upon a troop of night marchers, that if the chief didn't mind being looked upon, you'd be okay. But yeah, it is weird. It's definitely, I don't know. There's a lot of sort of overlap and certain things about this that feel like it relates to the Dark Watchers. But then there's a lot of sort of specificity related to this that it's like very different.
One thing that I found was this interview with a lady named Norma Joyner, who's Hawaiian, and apparently I think her daughter Carissa Joyner. Anyway, they've been featured on a lot of TV programs and stuff dealing with the paranormal, and it's an interview by Brad Steiger.
Oh, yeah, Brad Steiger.
And he asked her, what's your belief about the night watchers? And she says that she believes them even though she's never encountered them. And she says, I know these stories about such encounters are not made up. I truly believe that they are souls that keep to their old ways. I don't believe that they are here to harm or hurt. They just want to keep their old ways as they know it. She says, I guess my Japanese grandmother was influential in always telling me never be afraid of ghosts. It's humans who will bring hurt. And Brad talks about how he's found like similar sort of quote unquote marchers in other cultures. Sometimes they're called like the old ones or the ancients or even the guardians.
Lovecraft.
And so, yeah, no kidding. And so it is interesting. It kind of comes back around, dude, to I think ultimately like what our generalized thesis is on our show is we don't know. And in some ways, it could all be one thing. It could all be different things. And also, in this case, right now, if you ask me right now, I'm really leaning toward this sort of idea of what she just talked about, which is like the ancients, the potentially like what you said, the fallen angels and stuff.
I mean, it could be.
I never thought about that until today.
Are we getting into, before we get into like our thoughts on this, I do have a couple like little sort of stories. This is by a poster that said they were night marchers, the spirits of the Hawaiian warriors. I live on Maui, and some nights it sounds like thousands of them are running down the valleys to the ocean to fight. It's as creepy as it is real. I mean, like, just imagine that. Like, you're just hanging out, or it's in the middle of the night, and it just sounds like hundreds or thousands of men are just like running, chanting, beating drums all around your house, just running past your house.
I mean, culturally,
so
if you're
crazy.
from Hawaii, I bet it's like
Just more normal.
one level of scary. Imagine you're just some, Wachichu or whatever their version of white guy is.
Gringo.
Yeah, just sitting there in your thing. You're there for like a surf trip with your buddies, and all of a sudden, thousands of warriors are running around outside. Terrifying.
Yeah. This one says, yes, I live on Maui for many years in Napili, and we could hear the marchers' drums and chants all through the gully. It was terrifying and awesome all at once. As for the Menehunes, which I don't know what that is, taking the road past Kapalua, I've only driven there twice and won't do it again. So yeah, there's just a ton of these encounters. Like I found this one that's like pretty long, so I'm not going to get into it, but it's basically this guy. He was in the army with like a soldier, his friend. They were in the Middle East. I think it was roundabout like Desert Shield, Desert Storm. They fought together, they ate together, they hung out all the time because they were, sort of in a war-torn environment. Anyway, years later, after the war, they would come back, and he went over to visit his friend. He said they're driving late at night. His friend was kind of showing him, sort of local cool stuff that, only like the locals know about. So he was like showing him like some sort of view at the top of a mountain or whatever. And he said they parked the Jeep and they're like walking around, which was like a, like some sort of like, maybe like an ancient or like an old like graveyard type area. And they're just sort of like walking around looking, and like the moon was bright. And then suddenly the friend, the one that lived there, who was Hawaiian, he just starts looking like panicked. And he starts immediately taking all of his clothes off. And around this time, the friend that was there visiting is looking at him like, what is happening? And right about that time, he starts hearing what sounds like drums, like these giant drums. And then he starts sounding what sounds almost like an animal crying or some sort of like wailing. By this time, he's starting to realize like, oh, wait a minute, something is like happening, because this is happening over the course of a few seconds. And his friend is completely naked. He's on the ground, face down, staring at the ground, and he has his hands to his side. And his friend is like, take your clothes off now. And apparently that is like part of this thing. I don't know why.
Or it shows some sort of, I bet. Okay, my guess would be that when you do that, it's so that you can maybe like, you'd be instantly recognized by these spirits that are from long, long ago. Mm-hmm. And then just taking what that lady said about them being steeped in their tradition and their ways. You can't be wearing these modern clothes. You know what I mean?
It's like disassociating yourself with.
Yeah, just being like, yeah, I'm here for it too, man. Let's go.
Yeah.
You know?
But he said that like he took his shirt off and he didn't take his pants off because he said in the back of his mind, even though he was hearing all this stuff, he thought, well, there still could be a possibility that it's like a joke, right? So his friend's like, get on the ground, face down. And he can tell because he's served with this guy in war.
Yeah, he trusts him. This is his buddy.
He knows like, oh, wait a minute, this guy's like serious. So basically the guy that's visiting does the same thing. And he says as he's doing this, he can feel what feel like people walking all around him and like their feet like rubbing against his arms, his legs. And it's just like he said, like the sound of like the drumming and like what sounds like, at the time he wouldn't have known that it was like a conch shell or whatever. He's just hearing this like otherworldly like wailing kind of thing, or like this like crazy sounds, drum beating, there's like chanting, and it just sounds like an entire group of men doing this, or just like walking over these people.
Wow. So it's like he gets down, then he feels them like it's like he's in the middle of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Yeah, and they're not like stepping on him. They're like, but it would be like if somebody was like walking around you. You know, you'd feel like somebody's foot like rubbing against your arm or your, you know, whatever. But he said by the time that happened, he was so terrified that like he just refused to look up until the sound was like completely gone. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
So part of me, okay, I'm going to be sort of a Debbie Downer a little bit. Part of me originally thought, and I kind of always thought this until we started researching it more, but originally I thought, well, to me, this Night Marchers thing kind of feels more like Ghost of like Gettysburg or,
right. Stone tape type stuff.
Yeah, stone tape theory, exactly. Like it's just, you're kind of just witnessing this sort of replaying of something that happened in this reality. And so I always thought it was that, but like something with like this and being able to see, or like the guy being able to like feel certain things, or like, I don't know, it does feel like there's maybe a little more to it. And even especially like there's just story and account after account when you look these up, these, you know, and they're all like, for the most part, like locals, you know, that live on the islands, where they're a lot more sort of used to it. You know, to them, it's like a lot more of like a normal sort of thing. But the idea of like being able to see like these like torches and stuff, I feel like that's not something that would quite show up in the stone tape theory, maybe. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I mean,
maybe.
I feel like I remember them sort of like hearing the gunfire, smelling the freaking like gunpowder and stuff.
Yeah, all of that stuff. Well, one of the things that was really interesting to me is I ran across this like, you know, there was some sort of like ghost hunting group, and because I used to be really into like ghost hunters and all that stuff, and they had this evidence that was like fascinating, where it was somewhere around Gettysburg, this like an old factory or something, maybe like, you know, like less than a mile from actual Gettysburg. And, you know, they're just sort of like filming, and they're filming, and it's just like an old barrel that's kind of like sticking up, right? But then when they click to like the FLIR camera, like, you know, gives you like a heat signature, basically, you see like fire in the barrel. And then you see what looks like almost like a guy's like warming himself up by the fire. But then you turn it off and it's just a barrel, nothing in it at all. So I don't know. I've always thought that was really interesting. That idea that like, you know, you could see that if you're able to see like some sort of heat.
Man,
signature.
I mean, now that you say that coupled with what we said a few minutes ago, talking about the certain time of day. Now, I have no idea, because I just have no idea. But spectrums of light, are certain spectrums more visible at certain times of day? I mean,
yeah. Oh, right. Yeah,
you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Maybe that plays a part into being able to see that, just like that camera can sort of see that. I don't know. It's interesting, man.
There's a topic that, man, it's been real difficult not to just go full in on, because it's so just expansive and vast that there's clearly overlap with the Shadow Man stuff, but I think it would be doing it a disservice if we didn't just give it its own thing, and that is the jinn. And that's one of the things with them is, you know, they're sort of looked at as like, okay, there's three types of beings that are created by God. There's humans, there's angels, and, you know, fallen angels, and then there's the jinn. And we've talked about this before, and of course it's been like Disney-fied, and, you know, 1001 Arabian Nights, and like we see it as like, oh, it's just like a genie and you rub the lamp and all that stuff. But they take that stuff like very seriously over there, and they are kind of known as being like born of like smokeless fire. That's for you, Clay. And so there is that idea that like, okay, well, what if that is the, how would you say it? Like almost like if they're viewing it through sort of like Muslims are viewing it through their lens of like, okay, there's angels, humans, and then these other things called jinn. What if those other things are the ghosts of the Nephilim, and that's why they're born of like smokeless fire, because they're sort of disembodied. And then the angels would be looked at as like the watchers or the creators of those like jinn. You know what I mean? It gets like there could be like a lot of overlap. But in saying all that, I do think that, I don't know, it's almost like one of the things that jinn are kind of known for is like there are like social hierarchies apparently within them. They can look totally different from like territory to territory. There's just so much about them. And so the idea that like, well, what if these night marchers were never actually soldiers at all, but they're just these ancient like jinn or Nephilim, if you will, who just inhabited that area, and so they carried on with those like customs. Maybe they started those customs, like far long before like humans were there, and then the humans sort of adopted the thing, and so they're just like, oh, there's just these like spirits of humans, when in reality, maybe they were there like first. And it's the same with like the Dark Watchers. Maybe they were there first, and that's just like their territory.
I mean, I don't know. This episode has made me think of this in a completely new light.
Yeah,
I mean, like kind of flipped everything that I thought on its head. Even with the side of stuff that I've sort of brought to it. Wow, I don't know. That's wild, man. I think what we need to do is next week kind of come back and sort of just present all of our theories and talk about your personal encounter, some of the listener stories that have been sent in, and just kind of just like really, I don't know. It's just, man alive. I don't know what to think, to be honest. I could sit here for another couple of hours.
Yeah, right.
And I need some time to think is the best way I can put it.
Well, and also if you're listening to this and maybe you just have like your own opinion on this. Maybe you know some things about like the Nephilim or the Dark Watchers or the Night Marchers or the Shadow Man or Hat Man that we've just completely missed. Hey, we're not ashamed to say, send it on in and we'll give you credit, because at the end of the day, this show is like here to entertain us. It's here for posterity, for our kids to listen to, their dads, just ramble with their best friend years into the future. But beyond that, one of the main reasons is to, this show acts like an aggregate. And so like if you guys have knowledge on something that we've missed or maybe we've gotten something completely wrong, hey, never feel weird about like sending something like that in. And, maybe it changes our perspective on things, but that can always be a good thing. So we welcome that.
For sure.
If you would like to do those things, head on over to our Instagram, drop us a DM, jump in the comment section. We'd love to have you. If you would like to tell your own story, your own local urban legend, your own local, I don't know, maybe you've had your own sort of paranormal encounter with a shadow man or a ghost or jinn or whatever, and it's more long form, send it over to thatwouldberadpod@gmail.com. Even better, if you would like to take the leap, be brave and tell your own story to possibly be featured to possibly be featured in a future episode. Head on over to thatwouldberadpodcast.com, where you can leave basically a voice memo, and we'd love to feature it. Especially you guys, if you do have anything related to shadow men or something that maybe you once thought was a ghost, but it does kind of fall under the Shadow Man umbrella. We would really love to feature it for our big finale next week. Head on over to our Patreon, The Rabbit Trail. It's a little looser, a little goosier. It's a little later when we record, and just more of what you love, more rambling, more postulating, more hypothesizing. But it really does support us. It helps this train stay on the tracks. Give us a 5-star review if you have the time. Tell that weirdo friend of yours that would love the show. That stuff means the world to us, and it really makes a difference. You got anything else, Woody?
I think that's it, man.
Right on, pal. Well, we love you. We appreciate you. And as always,
be rad.
That's the way it goes. time where I just needed some sunshine. You were already dead before you became a ghost. You always said our future would be a parade of flowers, but now all that's left is a single rose. That's the way it goes.
Access granted.
Pareidolia. Wait, pareidolia. 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 As the sun begins its descent behind.
As the sun began.
No, begans. Even worse.
As the sun begins.
Okay. Already off to a hell of a start. This was you last week.
Mm-hmm.
And down the central.
Boy.
God, dude. I'm so stuck on Matt Berry because he's the guy that's on What We Do in the Shadows.
Mm-hmm.
And like, so everything I'm saying, I'm like hearing him being like, New York City.
The other thing I was going to talk about, well, actually later tonight when we get together, I have something that I want to talk about on the Patreon.
Okay.
I've done it again. You'll understand what I mean when we get there.
What have you done again, pal?
Just let's get this show on the road here now.
Okay. Well.
I'm already sweating.
Shh.